Actually, you see the following section, chapter, what will be, that is the Shema chapter in a guidebook, so to speak, they're putting down the halachas of Shmita. This is probably one of the most important chapters there, and it deals with what you really need to know when you have something that's Kedusha Shvius that you brought home. There's a chos of our learning, Hilchos Shmita, the lands pertaining to, the halachas pertaining to the land of Eretz Yisrael. So this is a chos we keep our Admas Amma, our land should be miskaper for the dam. And we should have the land that's really rawy to be miskaper for the Gedam that needs to be miskaper for.
Amen.
So last week we discussed all sorts of things pertaining to Shmita, all sorts of different types of systems for Shmita, different approaches to Shmita. This week we're going to discuss, assuming you have something which is Kedusha Shvius. If you have something that's not Kedusha Shvius, so there aren't any particular halachos as to what needs to be done with it. It's regular food, same thing as any other year, whether it's because you're viewing Nachri as not having Kedusha Shvius, things that were grown by non-Jews on non-Jewish owned land. Whether it's because you bought something that came from outside of halachic Israel, whether it's something from the previous year, or whether maybe it's Heter Mechira and you're viewing Heter Mechira as not having Kedusha Shvius because the idea is that it's a Nachri and then that it doesn't have any Kedusha Shvius. Whatever the reason is, not that I was advocating that, but whatever the reason is, if you bring something that doesn't have Kedusha Shvius, there's no particular halachos for it. It's regular food. Do with it as you wish, as you would any other time, without having to think twice. But if what you brought back home was Kedusha Shvius, so what do you do with it? So we discussed last week already some of the things that you can or can't do with it. We'll discuss it in a little bit of greater depth. There's all sorts of different issues with taking something which has Kedusha Shvius and not using it in its usual form of usage. It could be it's because in a certain way you're destroying it. It could be because in a certain way it's not. Ma'achla means to eat it in its normal form of eating it, the way you usually eat it. There's all sorts of different minute twinks in how to say what the problem is. But at the end of the day, it has to be eaten in the form that type of fruit is generally eaten. So if you have something that's always consumed cooked, or most of the time it's consumed cooked, but you might have sometimes a recipe that calls for it raw for whatever reason. So such a fruit, one of the fruits here for the simonim. It's not a vegetable, it's a fruit, I forgot what it's called. Excuse me, but it's something that you're supposed to cook. So you have such a fruit that you're supposed to cook. Now, it happens to be, I have a salad that calls for little tiny pieces of it to give some sort of flavor to it or whatever it is, raw. So now I'm going to put it in raw. So no, that's not the way it's intended to be used for. I'm using it now as for a different purpose than how it's usually consumed. And the Torah says, or Chazal interpret it, to mean that we should not eat it in such a way, but rather eat it only cooked. And same vice versa. I have fruits that are eaten primarily raw, like many food are. So it becomes problematic for me to go and cook it. Now what about a fruit, which I wouldn't call mechzal, I wouldn't say it's half and half, but a good part of the time it's even cooked. Apples. People make applesauce all the time, kapot, caramelized apples, all sorts of different dishes, apple pie, apple kugel, cranberry apple, cobbler, whatever it is, all sorts of different food products that are made with cooked apples. But I don't know that it's primarily, it's probably even less than primarily, it's probably about maybe 30% of the time, 30% of the apples in the store end up being eaten in some sort of cooked fashion. Now it could be you can throw in other things because cooked could also be any other form. So it's juiced and things like that. So you see that there's fruit that are often juiced, and that's a very high percentage. They grow a lot of apples for juicing. Actually, some of the apple juices, especially the more concentrated kinds, are sometimes created by using cooking processes at some point in time. But always what they do is they smush the apple first into like a pulp, and then they take out the juice from the pulp. But regardless, so it could be that you can throw them all together and say there's an even higher percentage of apples that are even cooked. Now we're going to get to juicing also, because juicing is likely also an issue. But the point is, so now I have something which is often at times eaten cooked, but not the norm. Not that's what I mean. That's what you do with an apple. No, it's not what you do with an apple. Usually you look at an apple and you say, delicious. It's a nice crunchy fruit to eat. So, but an apple becomes a matter of contention as to whether it's okay to cook it or not. Now, if I have somebody, a baby in the house, and a baby doesn't eat an apple as is, but it does eat applesauce. So then I can definitely cook it into applesauce for the baby. Once it's cooked, probably anybody could eat from it. Also, that's most likely, again, the opinions that are more machmir. It's never difficult to find opinions that are more machmir, and nowadays it's never too difficult to find opinions that are more mekel also. But that's okay. If I have somebody who's a little bit old and feeble or something like that in the house also, and they can't eat fresh apples, but they eat apples also, it's part of their regular diet and something like that. So again, there's a chus of having an older parent in the house or grandparent in the house, something like that. So yeah, they can also make applesauce out of kedusha shvius apples. Pears is already something which is even less often eaten cooked, but often enough you make a pear compote, right? Or some sort of a mushed pear type of dish, or a pear pie or something like that. Plenty of happens, or pear and wine sauce happens plenty. So such the thing as a pear, definitely it would be advisable not to cook stam. But again, if you have a baby in you, it's something you usually make baby food out of, so that would be fine. Otherwise, it should be avoided. Definitely other fruits, peaches, apricots. So right, people sometimes throw them into a more exotic pie or something like that. They make a more exotic compote, something like that. But still, at that point, that's something which is really primarily eaten fresh. It's not a normal thing. When people see an apricot, they doesn't come to mind, apricot pie. Apples, if you're American, it's a good old apple pie, it comes to mind, but not with apricots. So at that point in time, that's also something that really should be avoided. If somebody did cook it, they forgot, they didn't realize, whatever it is, their husband went shopping, he bought something which was kedusha shvius. Well, it's because he bought something which was heter bechira, and we're going to get to what happens with the money. If I bought something accidentally, that's kedusha shvius. Or whether it's that he bought something which was actually bona fide kedusha shvius, hands down. So, but it's something that I decided that I'm viewing as kedusha shvius, and now it comes into my home. Brought home, miscommunication between wife and husband, wife, whichever way it went, and it got cooked. So it's mutter to eat. There's no problem eating it now that it's been made. But you have to eat it b'kedusha shvius. Now what happens if there was one peach sitting there from last week's Otza Bezdin shopping trip in the fridge, and you have a cleaning lady or something like that, she comes into the house and she was making seder in your refrigerator, and she took the 5 new ones that you bought by the supermarket that was Nachri or from Chile or from wherever it was, and you have the one sitting around from Otza Bezdin shopping last week. They all got mixed together, and now out comes this apricot or peach pie or whatever it is, and you say, oh my goodness, where's the one from the Otza Bezdin? And your spouse says, what? I only saw one bag. I put them all into the pie. Nothing to panic about, it's fine. But the entire pie now has to be eaten b'kedusha shvius. So, and that would be even if you were able to like identify that, no, I know it went into dafka, I put it into this part of the pie, it's all cooked together. Once it's all cooked together, even though I can identify it was this one was like the more orangey colored peach and this one was the white peach, and whenever it doesn't make a difference, at that point in time, the whole pie becomes a chefta, becomes one piece of kedusha shvius. It all has to be eaten as kedusha shvius, which means you can't throw away the garbage. We talked about it last week, so you have leftovers. It's starting to smell a little bit. It's not so. It doesn't look so tasty anymore. It got crushed. The kid threw a piece of it on the floor. Nobody wants to eat it. It's got all those crumbs and stuff from the floor on it, etc. So it's kodesh b'kedusha shvius, and you have to deal with it appropriately. Either double wrap it or put it in a Shmita pach v'chulei. Now let's talk about it for a second. What happens? I went to the supermarket and I bought something that was kedusha shvius. Now, let's say I'm taking a view. I'm going to get a little personal here. What I do at home. For me, at the mechira, I view it as kedusha shvius. If that's the case. So I bought a fruit by accident from the supermarket, not realizing it was Heter Mechira. I bring it home, and then I realize. So I bought it now. I don't have to return it. I could return it because I said I didn't want to do Mekach Memker with it. And we're going to get to if I bought vegetables, because vegetables has a whole different section of halachos. So we're going to discuss that momentarily. But I bought it. Once I bought it, let's say I cooked it, so now I can't return it. Nobody's going to take it back. Now that I bought it, what happens to that money that it was bought with? Now, over here I went to the supermarket, and the supermarket doesn't really care about the money that I bought it with. Theoretically, what happens to that money, though, let's say I bought it from somebody who didn't intentionally sell it on to me, it was somebody who accidentally sold it on to me. Or they do care at some point in time, for whatever reason. So now, that money was nitfas. It obtained kedusha shvius onto itself because it was used to buy something that had kedusha shvius. So at that moment, what happens to it is it also is kedusha shvius. Except for money we don't consume, and you don't throw it out. At least I hope not. I can't afford to. So what happens to that money? So now there's something really cool about the money. The fruit itself are always going to maintain its level of kedusha shvius all through until it's decomposed. Still doesn't exist anymore. It has kedushas shvius, has that sanctity of shvius. The money, though, that obtained the kedusha only because it was used to acquire something which was kadosh kedusha shvius, can lose. It's saying the second it's switched for something else. What do I mean by switch? Second I buy something else with that money, it now loses. The money becomes regular chulin, regular mundane money, and whatever was bought with it, whether it was a shtender or whether it was another fruit, that becomes kadosh b'kedusha shvius. So now what you're supposed to do, let's say you have money, you sold something accidentally that was kadosh b'kedusha shvius. You bought something, it's a pesdim, and somebody, your next door neighbor said it looks gorgeous or whatever it is, and he says how much did you pay for it? You tell them $5, whatever, 5 shekels, whatever it is. They give you the 5 shekels. You forgot. Now we talked about it. It could be that if I was only taking the 5 shekels because I want to be able to replace it, I don't mind giving my neighbor some fruit, except for I'm going to need to buy more fruit for I live on a tight budget, cold budget, whatever it is. So I'm happy to give it to my neighbor, but I need the money back so I can buy another one. That's okay, because that doesn't look like Mekach Memker. It doesn't look like commerce. There's no business going on here. Nobody's getting rich, nobody's making money, nobody's trying to support themselves because they gave you whatever it is amount of fruit for 5 shekels. But let's say it was a greater amount, or I did make some profit off it, and it definitely looked like that's what I was doing, or I got it for free. My cousin, my father, my brother, somebody who owns a farm. I just came back from some yeshuv where they have lots of fruit trees. I picked it all up with kedusha shvius. I come back, I open the back of my truck, I start selling it out to other people without thinking. So now that money, what I'm supposed to do with that money is go and buy another food product. It doesn't have to be fruit, but it should be something that's consumable. I can buy fish with it, whatever it is. Now that food item gets kedushas shvius, and I eat it with all the halachas of kedusha shviyas, which is basically really that I have to eat it all and eat it in the way it's normally eaten. So now I have the fish. That would be a perfect example of something which is supposed to be eaten cooked and not raw. I went out and I bought a piece of fish. Now, all sushi aside, but sushi might also be a problem. Once I bought it, so now, yes, some people will make salmon into sushi, or rainbow fish, or tuna fish, or whatever else it is into sushi. Some people do that. A lot of people do it. It's bamoda. It's very in style. But it's that. It's definitely, especially the melt they put into the piece of the sushi, even if you get like the big clumps of them. It's not. Most salmon, most salmon is cooked in some form or another. Maybe smoked. So we'll talk. That's a different child. Smoked is considered not. But most salmon most fish is something which is cooked, and therefore, so I bought fish, and now it has kedusha shviyas. The fish I shouldn't eat it raw. I should not make my raw sushi rules out of it. I should rather take that fish, cook it, and that's what I'm supposed to do with it. Now that it has kedusha shviyas on it. So that's what you should do if somehow money gets it. Now it's not just money. And this might be even more common because people don't think about it as commerce as much. But I go weekly to visit my cousin on the Moshav, and I pick fruit there or whatever it is, gorgeous, lush, wonderful fruit. And I come back and I have a neighbor who's a carpenter, makes nice furniture. And so I tell him I have no problem bringing you fruit, but make me a desk, a table, chairs, beds, whatever it is, a house, whatever. It doesn't make a difference. Now that all has kedusha shviyas on it. Let's not take a house; that'll be a little bit complicated. But now I have any piece of furniture from, and now that piece of furniture has kedusha shviyas. What am I supposed to do with it? I hold a chair. But what am I supposed to do with it? So the idea is also we don't want to leave anything because what do you do when it gets the shas habir? When is the shas habir for a chair? Does the chair have a shas habir? It gets complicated. So what do? Again, so you're going to be machlif, you're going to exchange its kedusha onto something else. So you're going to have to make some sort of acquisition from the chair to something else. It's the value of the chair. And you basically barter the chair for some sort of food. I want to keep the chair, so I give the value instead of the chair, somebody for the fruit, but that fruit ends up with the meat or the vegetables or whatever it is that I buy. That obtains the kedusha shviyas now. The chair is free of its kedusha shviyas, and the kedusha shviyas is now on the fruit, vegetable, meat, fish, whatever it is. And it should be eaten in the form that it's usually eaten in.
So if you didn't do the exchange on the chair, would you not be allowed to use it until you had done an exchange?
You probably could. If that happens, call me up. I'll be excited to deal with such a shah, because I don't know how many of those shahs I get in Shmita. I get a lot of things about, I bought in the store, and I don't know what they do and where it's from and how it is. I get a lot of those types of questions. What should I do? Should I return? Should I not return? Now, I actually discussed something briefly, which is an interesting shah. It came up for me also. Assuming that you're not using heter mechira. This is for discussion's sake. I'm not assuming for anybody here what they're doing or not doing. But assuming you're not using heter mechira, so you buy something in a store that does use heter mechira, and I think it's something that shouldn't be done, assuming that that's true. But now I don't want to use it as kedusha shviyas. I don't want to have bought it either. I want to get the money back because I don't know where that money is going to end up and what's going to happen with it. So I go back to the store and I want to return it. Can I return it, or now my causing is at lifnei ivra or something like that? So it's not lifnei ivra because whichever way you want to look at it, the store definitely thinks. Even if I would maintain that the Rabbanut Rashit is horrible for doing that, even if I'm not saying that, I think it's a wonderful thing that the Rabbanut Rashit does it for the Hamon Am, and it's a whole different story, not a discussion for now. But even if all that or whatever it is, they think they're doing it beheter. And Puk Chazi, you go into the shuk, Machane Yehuda, I don't know what the equivalent is of Beit Shemesh, but you go somewhere where you have all the budkas over there in the shuk, every store is its own place. You go in right now, and most of the fruit and vegetable vendors have some sort of Mahajin certification. I'm not saying how good each Mahajin certification is or isn't, but most of them, the vast majority of them, have some sort of Mahajin certification. You go in there in Shmita, again, I don't know what it's going to be like during this Shmita, but the past two Shmitas, you go into the shuk, and most of the fruits and vegetable bastas at the Mechira too. even last Shmita where the Rabbanut Mishalayim wasn't doing Heter Mechir, so they got from your neighbors over here from Matei Yehuda and to certify the Heter Mechir stores in Yerushalayim last Shmita. So you see that most people maintain during the regular years they're doing Bahadrin, but over here it comes to Shmita, they think that it's fine. Maybe it's not as good or whatever it is. Maybe they're going to lose some clientele or whatever, that type of stuff. But it's worth their while, and they think that it's legitimate, and that's what they do for the Shmita year. If that's the case, they think they're doing it bad, and there's no lifnei ira on them. You don't have to get into whether their rabbi's right, not right, and whether you like the rabbi, don't like the rabbi. That's none of your business. They're doing something in accordance to their rabbi, so you don't want to have to deal with all of it. You can return it, and it's not a problem. And it's not mekach umemker that they're giving you money back, because it doesn't look like that. People don't sell one item to a supermarket or to a store in the shuk. The supermarket sells lots of items to lots of people.
And they're not getting back money that someone else has changed from.
Okay, so overall, the reason why you don't have to worry about it, and let's say B'chalal on the whole system, because there is money that's real with that they didn't even use Heter Mechir, that there were stuff, bona fide, things that were sold, that you have all sorts of smaller farmers that sell things that didn't subscribe to any Heter Mechir, that below radar. I just got a phone call from somebody not far from here. They wanted to apply for a new kashrus on their farm. So I actually told him, part of why he wanted to apply for that was he wanted to circumvent the Rabbanut, and I told him we can't certify you legally if you don't have Rabbanut. But I asked him, how do you manage that? He sells to stores, does deliveries, does all sorts of different things. So he told me that he's below the radar. He's not big enough that he's selling to big places. Now, there are places that really should be on the radar and they who miss the radar. There are places that are really below radar level. But you have such things.
So we can't rely on anyone?
No. So what do you do with the money that goes around from that? It's not relying, because if you're buying from someone that has a good hashgacha, they won't be taken from such a place. But what do you do? So there is money that gets mixed back into the system. L'maisa, it's a minimal amount. Most money. So I don't know that it's right with the currency that's flowing around Israel. That's off. Beis is most money that goes. Most money, you're not getting it directly from the store that bought it for the fruit, that received it from the fruit. It was already spent on something else, and the kedusha shvius is on to all sorts of other things. And me'elad herself. So there isn't really a chashash, but the money that you got probably was clean of whatever chashash there might have been. Anyway, that's base. Gimel is that Amaisa, you can't discount the fact that Yeshal Milismach with all the various ateva and everything like that, especially considering the fact that we assume Shmita Bisman is the Amen. It's only a rabbinic connect. Yes.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of the game over here, but are you going to be getting on the question of credit cards?
You're talking about what's called buying back buying back on credit, so it's not considered a purchase or whatever it is because you pay later.
What happens to the money that if the purchase is transacted through a credit card?
Oh, you want to know what happens tachlis?
Yeah.
Okay, what happens tachlis is a little bit more complicated. Whether you're allowed to do it in the first place or people want to do it, the pashas is you're not allowed to do that in the first place. Buying on a credit card because you're not making the purchase right now. It's a purchase that comes later on. They get the money from a separate party and it gets transferred or whatever it is. About whether there's any kedusha that's attached to anything, Avi Pashas is also not going to be any kedusha that's attached to anything.
So to clarify, so when you're buying Otza Bezdin, you should always use cash.
Otza Bezdin, you're not buying anything. You're paying for the service. It doesn't make a difference. If they have a system set up that they're sophisticated enough, that Otza Bezdin Tachana, that they can take a credit card, so then you're fine. If it's not sophisticated enough and they can take a credit card, so they're not going to let you pay their credit card. But regardless, it doesn't make a difference because over there you're only paying for the services rendered to you until the fruit comes to you. So it's for whatever services went down in the field to make sure that the fruit, again, without doing anything that was usher. So that was something. Now, but like we said, shamar v'nevad, a fruit that was worked on. You weren't allowed to work on it. You're not allowed to sell it. But if it ends up by you already, whether it's because you bought it accidentally, or whether it's because you received it as a present from somebody who bought it, or whether it's because you received it from somebody without buying it, but it was a fruit that was worked on, they fertilized it, they pruned the tree, they did all sorts of melachos, they did all sorts of things that were forbidden. If it's by priha eitz, by things that grow on the tree, and similar types of things, so that's going to be mutter, it's permissible, and it has kedusha shvius. It might even be something good to consume. The issue is on getting to sfichim. Sapichin and Svichim, which is as follows. Now it's a question whether Svichim is a Deraisa or Derabanan. It's a machlokes in the Gemara between the Akiva and the Chachamim, Mishnayos, or between the Akiva and the Chachamim, as to whether it's whether it's Deraisa or Derabanan. The Akiva holds it's the Deraisa, the Chacham holds Derabanan. The Mashmayos of Rabbi the Rishayim is actually like Rabbi Akiva, but the Hachra of the Achronim, most of the latter post-medieval Arab Paiskim maintained that it was that it's only Derabanan. Again, only not to minimize, but that it only as opposed to being a Deraisa. As opposed to being a what? That says that you're not allowed to harvest it. Which means that would be darshan for everything, even on fruit. That you're not allowed to do a harvest where you take like for a commercial harvest. That you have to harvest a minimal amount, and we learn from it that you should do it not in the usual way. So first of all, it should be ma'at, and second of all, that if you usually harvest with a certain type of tool, you should use a different type of tool, things like that. But that's regardless. Mekiva has a whole series of drushes of psukim, different things, and many of the Rishonim, definitely before the Rishonim, this man of the Ge'onim, they're mashma that like the halachas like Rabbi Akiva, but later on it seems that all the Achronim seem to assume, like the Rambam, that it's midrabanan. The Rambam is very vocal and very clear on the fact that it's a midrabanan. Now, even according to Rabbi Akiva, where it's a deraisa, it wouldn't necessarily be all the svichim, because svichim refer to something in particular. A svich hasada, like the pasuk says, which is things that grow me'alehan, the regular herbs and things like that you have in a field that grow on their own accord. Nobody really plants them and they grow, or things that you cut down and they continue to grow and grow and grow. We apply those halachos to pretty much the whole vegetable spectrum. Anything which is planted, not necessarily ha'adama, something like a banana, which isn't generally planted every year, it's planted every few years, that already might have a different halacha. But something which is planted generally every year, so such produce, which is most grains and most vegetables, are going to have a halacha, even if it's planted every other year. The Chazon Ish is very clear that has a bit of a sfiach, and that seems to be something which is accepted by all. So such produce, you're not allowed to use. Now, since we assume that it's a derabanan, I'm going to discuss why Chazal made such an enactment. And the reason for that is as follows. I think we just mentioned this last week briefly, but I have an apple tree, I have a pear tree, an orange tree, a peach tree, a cherry tree, whatever it is. Those things aren't things that you plant this year to eat this year. Forget about Netter of and Arla, not because I'm not allowed to eat for the first 2 years, because it's not what you do. Yeah, every year people plant new trees so that in a few years from now, whatever it is, so that there should continue to be an abundance of such fruit, but it's not something that I plant now for now. Vegetables, on the other hand, and herbs are things that I plant now to be eaten in the near future, within this coming year. As such, Chazal word, we allow you to eat all the herbs that are already growing wildly because they're already growing. But because it's something which is easy to plant, you just throw out, you disperse seeds in America, in like the Home Depots and stuff like that. So they sell always like these big tifzarot, these big things of like a big bag that you just throw out in the wind over an area of land. It's better if you loosen the soil a little bit beforehand, but even if you don't, it's bound to grow. And you'll have all sorts of herbs that just sprout. Something which is very easy, much easier to plant at least. It doesn't take as much care. Every kid tries to plant peach trees and plum trees and apple trees and whatever it is in the backyard. And I don't know, it's almost never that you ever see a tree that really grows from all those things that the kids try planting in the backyard. Now, the truth of the matter is, between me and you, it's because our fruit, most of the fruit that we have, weren't planted from seeds, and they're incapable of reproducing through seeds. They were grafted, and if they have seeds, because they're grafted with something that depends on how it's grafted exactly. If it's able, then it has seeds, but those seeds really don't have any potential to. But the idea is it still is something. Even if you had an apple that wasn't tampered with and it wasn't some sort of lab-produced apple or whatever it is. It makes you feel great that even the apples you eat are synthetic. But it wasn't something like that. It was something that was really that really a genuine organic apple. And but now they already have organic laboratories, so beware. It's not a joke. We had somebody who wanted ashkach on something, and he was using organic stuff, and what it was, I was discussing an organic thing, and he told me, yeah, I buy it from an organic lab, and I looked into the organic lab online, or whatever it is, and I wasn't really, it's already starting to become I'm very confused as to what the difference is between organic and non-organic already, and genetically modified, or whatever it is. I'm very confused. So anyway, but it is much harder to plant a tree that it should grow. It takes more time until the sapling starts to sprout, until the whole process. So that's something that takes a lot of care, and it's something that's done for the long run, not for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months from now. Whereas vegetables are. Because of that, Chazal said, don't worry, the people are going to, in their own confines of their yard, they'll plant some vegetables that nobody sees. And then they'll say, yeah, you harvest it, there's no question about it. You come to somebody's house and you eat the zucchinis that come from their yard, or the cucumbers, or the cherry tomatoes, or whatever it is, and you don't even ask questions, because whatever, these things grow on their own. They reseed themselves from last year, so the one of the cucumbers that you didn't harvest, they got rotted on the ground, and the seeds inside, and it happens. I grew up, I mentioned this last week also, in Sharon, Massachusetts. We had a big backyard garden, and there were plenty of things that reseeded themselves from year to year just because of the things. So yeah, we usually weeded them out. It wasn't in the right place, and shilos of climb or whatever it was. So we were very careful to weed out these different types of things, depending on the situation, depending on the types of things. But it definitely happened that things reseeded themselves automatically. So it's not going to be a question. You see that I have it. So yeah, I've had over here the past few years these types of things growing in this patch over here in my yard. So Lopela, it came up again. So Chazal were worried about those types of things. Mishirabu Oivri Aveiro, when there were already people that had started doing such acts. And they said, I can't, no more. All this stuff is now forbidden. Doesn't make a difference if it grew on its own, didn't grow on its own. Now there are exceptions to the rule when it's clear that either it's something that nobody plants, that we do eat, but we eat wildly. Which Bisman Chazal, one of the examples that was given was mustard. Now, any of you that are familiar with the terrain around here know that mustard grows wildly all around Israel. You probably also know that nobody uses that mustard that grows wildly around Israel. It's extremely, extremely, extremely bitter, and it's just not really used. So, Bisman Chazal, the norm was to use, maybe it tasted differently, maybe it didn't taste differently, but in Bisman Chazal, the norm was to use the mustard that grew wildly, so because of that, there wasn't exeir smeared on it. Now, it's a shiloh nowadays if we would say that it changed, and even though it's mentioned that chardal, the mustard, doesn't have exeir smeared, but since nowadays it is something which is cultivated and we don't eat the wild type, so it could be that now the cultivated type does have a halacha of svichen on it, and the Chazon Ish paskins l'chumra on it, and I think that's generally what's accepted, but it's not something that's really so frequent. Most of the mustard products that are produced in Israel are produced from foreign mustard, not from Israel. Actually, I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of Israeli produced mustard also. There's a lot of Egyptian mustard. There's a lot of mustard from the region, that's for sure. But it's that's something for the kashrus organizations to worry about more than for you. Another exception is if it's a field that doesn't grow things. It's a barren type of field that you can't grow things in. It's a shallow field that you happen not to grow things in, if that would work. But we're not going to get into that because that probably would be problematic. But if I have a field that it doesn't grow things in, it's barren, it's horrible soil for whatever reason, there's all sorts of different, it's very rocky, it's very this, it's very that, whatever it is, things don't grow there. And you've tried, everybody knows this area is like wasteland, it just lays barren. So, and something happens to grow there. So from such a field, it's going to be permissible to eat produce that happen to have grown there. Other situations where it's clear that it's undesirable might be like if you have sometimes in a vineyard, you have things that sprout. So again, because there would be a problem of kalaim, so you don't really want it to grow there, but it was ripped out before it got into the shots of kalaim or whatever it is. So actually, a lot of it is mutter to eat, but it's not mutter to leave there. So it's clear that somebody wouldn't want it there, and it grew there. So again, in such a scenario, it will be mutter. If you think you have a different scenario, ask a question to a competent rabbi.
Why is it mutter? Because it grew in a field that's not grow, it doesn't normally grow there? And there's not good seed.
Because then it's clear that nobody would plant it. According to Rabbi Akiva, why it's mutter is a whole different shiloh. But since we're passing that it's derabanan, like the Chachamim, not like Rabbi Akiva, so that's the Chazon Ish is Machriya also. Because of that, if that's the way you're viewing it, so then there's definitely no shiloh. The shiloh, it's very simple. Nobody planted it there. You're going to tell me this something? Nobody wants it there. So nobody wants it there now. But once it grew there, I might as well enjoy it. So I can't have mint leaves that grew somewhere where nobody wants, or that it's impossible for it to grow there, or that nobody wants to go. But it did. So enjoy it. Does it have a kedusha shvius? The pashtos is that it would have kedusha shvius in such a scenario. Now the other eitzah is for svichin is that you get it from admas nachri, and then according to many opinions it wouldn't have kedusha shvius. According to others it would have kedusha shvius. It used to be divided as minig Yerushalayim and then minig b'nei brak, and everywhere else they had different minhagim. But nowadays it's already all mobile. You have a lot of b'nei brakers in Yerushalayim, and you have a lot of Yerushalayim and Bnei Brak, V'chulei, and you have lots of places in between. You have Beit Shemesh, and you have Kiryat Sefer, and you have all sorts of different places that sprouted up in between Modi'in and whatever else it is, and all those places, it's all become a big mushkebabel, and you can either decide for yourself what opinion you want to follow, or you can do whatever your rabbi tells you. OU policy, just for the record, is that Nachri does not have Kedusha Shvis.
As an organization, how much land do you use to show this passing is not
to tell you statistically, it's a little bit difficult. Because I really know more of the things that come our way. So there's certain ashkachas that we rely on during Shmita. They say it's nachri, we accept it as nachri without looking into it further. And then there are certain areas. If we have a company, we have a spice company that wants to buy produce from a particular place, so we look into there to make sure that it's bona fide nachri produce. Juicing. We mentioned before that we're going to discuss juicing. There's actually a lot of fancy shilas not related to Shmita about juicing. In Shmita we said you're only allowed to use a fruit for what its main purpose is. Now, what about if you have oranges or something like that, where a lot of oranges are grown primarily for juicing? So it's actually a question not just about Shmita, but because we pass about everything else, that we still view oranges as its main purpose as being as a food, so we continue to view it that way with regard to Shmita. Where else is it applicable?
Shabbos.
Is what?
Shabbos.
What do you mean?
It's something that's normally squeezed and it's
Oh, that when it's in the bone, it's the rice. Okay, I was thinking about an afkamina. It's correct. But what?
What bracha you say on it?
What bracha you say on it is something where it's very applicable, and it's a shaila even with regard to chocolate, because chocolate, even though it's highly processed, if you say that the whole idea behind chocolate is to grow it to make chocolate out of it, so it could be that you have to make ha'etz in chocolate. So there's a lot of shilas on it, and the Maisa, it's not far out. Stadim, there are many opinions in the Rishonim and the Achronim that maintain that you would have to make ha'etz on orange juice if it's grown from juicing, if it's from juicing oranges. Not necessarily orange juice that you made at home from whatever oranges you happen to have bought in the store. But if it's oranges, you buy Tropicana orange juice in America, where those oranges were definitely grown as juicing oranges, so there is a real shaila. The Ma'aseh Achra of the final psak of most of the contemporary poskim, I should say the contemporary poskim, you have some fringe poskim that maintain differently, but from the mainstream poskim is that we still view it as being primarily eaten as fruit, even though sometimes there's a particular type that's grown for juicing or something like that, and it might even be that more oranges are used annually for juicing than any other item. Nonetheless, now the truth of the matter is, from our point of view, it's true. There's a lot of juicing oranges out there, but a lot of the oranges that are used for juicing are regular oranges, just what they call like suk gimel. The lower class. They're really not so pretty, and they're already falling apart a little bit, whatever it is. That's a lot of it goes into the juicing, and therefore it is really hard when they do to create the same bricks. The way they do it is the orange juice that you got. It's not from last week's oranges. They take the orange juice from around the orange season, from all different types of oranges, and each one gets saved separately. They take a lab test for the bricks, for the liquid sugar ratio, and for the acidity ratio and that type of stuff, and then they mix it all together, all different oranges. It's most likely still 100% orange juice if it says on 100% orange juice. It's just mixed together from different orange juices that were perhaps either frozen or kept in aseptic bags or something like that. They keep it very well sealed so they don't go off. They mix it on later on in the season, so they should be able to have orange juice that has a ta'am achid, that has a unified taste throughout the year.
Those you're allowed to squeeze on Shmita.
No, so those Lamaisa, most opinions tell you not to squeeze during Shmita, even juicing oranges. But because Lamaisa, the way we view it is nobody would make a ha'etz on orange juice. I mean, again, I told you that there are people out there that do make ha'etz on orange juice, but that's not the mainstream. So if you're not from those people, if you're from the people that make ha'etz on orange juice, so for whatever reason you decide to make ha'etz on orange juice, you probably decide that you can also make orange juice out of oranges during Shmita. But if you're not from those people, so you don't really have an excuse to make orange juice out of oranges.
So you shouldn't be making smoothies then.
Smoothies is already a slightly different idea because that's the whole fruit. I just ground it up. So if I take something which is the whole fruit and I ground it up, it's not juice because there's a shiloh. I didn't discuss that actually. There's a shiloh by the juice. It's a good question, a very good question. There's a shiloh by the juice. What's the problem? Is it because it's just not a derech achila of the orange or the apple or whatever it is? Or is it because I'm ruining part of the fruit? What happens when I take the juice? A good part of the fruit goes to waste. So I have something else I'm going to do with it, whatever it is. But the process is really a process of taking part of the fruit away from the other part of the fruit, and maybe that's in some way a pigam in the kedusha shvius. Maybe somehow I didn't respect the sanctity of the fruit through that. So if the latter is the issue or part of the issue with that, so if you're making a smoothie, you're keeping the entire fruit. I take a piece of mango, that's kedusha shvius, but the whole entire mango goes into it. The problem is it could be that it's better to keep it with things that are only kedusha shvius if you're doing it with something which is kedusha shvius.
What about the pit? The whole mango doesn't
The pit, the pit doesn't have kedusha shvius because nobody eats mango pits. Now you want to know what to do because the mango has fruit around the pit. So mango fruit, you take off as much of the fruit as you can from around the pit. And what you don't have, because there's still fruit left on the pit, you should put it into Shmita pach. Whereas like an avocado pit, which comes out clean, that's fine. But I know like my kids love sucking on the mango pit. They like getting the stuff off the side of it. So, so that's something which I probably would recommend. It's usually, it's a hard call to make because if it's a negligible amount, mamish a negligible amount, you mamish removed as much as you could, and there's a tiny bit of that, so that would be okay. Just like anytime you peel something, when you peel a mango, there's a negligible amount of fruit that comes off, and then if you scraped it against your teeth or whatever it is, probably some more fruit would come off. But because that's what happens when you peel something, a negligible amount comes off, that's okay. There are two instances where we say making juice, making a liquid out of something is perfectly fine. What are those two instances?
Wine.
Very good. Wine or grape juice, because grape juice is really considered halachically part of the process of making wine. How do we refer to it in halachic literature? Yayin migitoi. Wine from the gat, from the press. Because what happens is if you're making at least a white wine, you press the grapes right away, and then you have grape juice, which would go into first stage fermentation. But right now, you're taking it out, and you're drinking it as juice, so it's referred to, it's a Gemara in a few places, where the Gemara refers to as yain migitoi, wine that came straight from the press before it fermented, and so it's viewed as being something which is part of the wine process. Because of that, there's all sorts of shilas about grape juice. If grape juice is all the applications of wine, or because it's a chiddush that we view it as wine, which it really is. Like there was a tshuva I saw from, I don't want to say from whom, but I saw a tshuva from somebody that you can be mekayim simchus yom tov on grape juice. So to me it was like a little bit of a funny tshuva, because the whole reason why wine has simcha is because it's something intoxicating to it. So so maybe you shouldn't drink enough wine for simchas yom tov that you're intoxicated, but a little bit of that to give you a little bit of that type of feeling, that's the idea of simchas yom tov in wine. But tell me that you get it from grape juice where it doesn't have any of that effect, I'm not sure. They probably drink wine before they come up. But Kiddush isn't because of din of Simcha. That then you can also be Yotze Kiddush on a Sheikh Medina, and also on Chama Medina, on things that are common, and drinks that are chashuv drinks. So the Gemara does consider, Rav Shlomo Zalman was very makbid. He says he doesn't know what the reason for yayin megita is. Therefore, he said you can't, even though we say by yayin that you can dilute the yayin and you can still make hagafen on it. So he says by grape juice he doesn't know if you can. Now others argued on Rav Shlomo Zalman, but it's a very interesting area in halacha that it's very hard to be magder. We had a shayla like this. We had this companies here in Israel. I know the Israelis have this thing that American grape juice is very sweet and has lots of sugar added to it or whatever it is, and then only Israeli grape juice is real grape juice. Now, as much as I'm very, apolitically Zionistic in my approach to things in Eretz Yisrael or whatever it is, and I'm very into Israeli products, and I don't buy wine from Chutz La'aretz or anything like that. I only buy wine from Eretz Yisrael. They happen to be wrong. I'm telling you from the inside that they happen to be wrong. American grape juice, the Kedem grape juice, is 100% grape juice. There's tricks to how they keep it sweet and whatever it is, but it's grape juice. Okay? The entirely grape juice. No shilas, no sugar added, it's entirely grape juice. The only one that isn't entirely grape juice is they have some sort of like very light tasting white grape juice, which there is a little bit of water added to it. But all the other ones are entirely grape juice. So we had a shayla like this. The Israeli companies do add sugar and water and all sorts of things to play around with it. Again, why? They'll all tell you because they want to keep the bricks, they want to have a uniform time. It also saves a few bucks and whatever it is, but there is that idea that they need to have a uniform time. There are the ones, what do you call it, tirosh from Carmel or whatever it is, there are ones that are 100% juice, and they actually use similar tricks to Kedem to keep it sweet and to keep the bricks the same all year round. But no, it's not. They put the grapes into to soak in sugar water, whatever it is. It's mythical. I'm not sure who came up with that idea. It's a great idea, but it's not what they do. Bricks is the sugar liquid ratio. So now they have. So what do they do though? The shayla was, how much of this playing around can you do and still call it hagafen? So by wine, kol oid, that you have a tam of the yayin, it's sufficient. So how do you know that you have a tam of the yayin? If you taste a little bit of alcohol, it's very clear when you taste the tam of the yayin. But by grape juice, if I'm adding sugar and water, when do I know that it's really that I'm tasting the grape juice and not the sugar? So it's something which is more complex, and we discussed the shayla with Rabbi Belsky, one of the senior Olim Paiskim, and so he said that he feels that it has to be a roiv nicker, it has to be the vast majority of it. So he said he felt 70% or something like that, because once you're playing around with it, you can't tell what the time is. So 70% of the mixture is grape juice, and only 30% is sugar water. He said it has to be sugar water; it can't be like a syrup, because that would defeat the purpose. Again,
70% chocolate.
What?
70% chocolate there. 70% chocolate.
Yeah.
It's eight. What is the story then?
No. So that we said in the Maisa, we don't view it as an eight, similar to the orange juice and all those types of things. Maisa, again, you can find poskim out there in Lomdus. It's a great drasha to give Friday night in one of these minyanim where you give like a halacha drasha or whatever it is. It's a great drasha. Halacha l'maisa. That's not part of the Masorah Sapsakas that you make in Shackle. But back to the grape juice thing. So that was, that was actually an interesting shot. So the two areas where you're allowed to, where you are lahedya allowed to make liquid out of a Shmita fruit is grape juice or wine, and what? Olive oil, right? Olive oil.
So we should stay away from almond milk and soy milk.
If it's made from Israeli Shmita produce, so then it's probably better. That's a question. The almond milk, I'm not sure that's a question because I think that almonds definitely, the assumption is that the vast majority of what almonds used for is to be eaten as an almond, maybe even to make it into a paste, but not definitely as an almond, not as a liquid. Something with like soy, which the soy in Israel doesn't grow in Israel, but this are very, very little of it at least. But even when you buy like fresh soy and stuff, most of it's imported. But let's say you would have something like that, so that's actually a shaila nachrainim. That's something where it is used by and large for an oil purpose, if that would be okay or not. Again, it's best to try to avoid doing that. If it was done, then it has kedusha shvius and it can be used. It's not always a problem to avoid it once it was made, unless you don't want to encourage them making it or something like that. That's a different cheshbon. But in terms of you have it already in your house, there's no reason not to eat it. It has kedusha shvius, so you don't have anything else to do with it. So enjoy it.
Do they cook coffee here?
What do you say?
They
The coffee they also don't grow here.
What about lemons?
What do you say?
Lemons.
Lemons is you want to know if you can make lemon juice because
That's
it's
all
primarily
we
used
use
for. It's primarily used for lemon juice because nobody eats lemons. So yeah, no, something where that's the only thing you really have to do with it. Life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? So that's probably that's fine.
So we have a big lemon tree and we spend the entire winter making lemonade.
No, so that's fine. To make lemonade from your lemon tree. Now you have to remember, if you have a lemon tree, you have to allow other people to come pick. But yeah, lemons you can squeeze it onto your fish, you can make lemonade out of it, you can do whatever you can. On Shabbos you can squeeze it onto your fish. You just can't squeeze it into lemonade on Shabbos. So if it's Shabbos, use it on your fish. If it's during the week, make lemonade.
The fruit part that remains on the peel, you could just throw out, and you have to put it in the Shmita.
I would suggest you putting it in a Shmita pach because there are usages out of the rest of the lemon, common usages. Lemon peel, sometimes used as flavoring or coloring to things. The lemon pulp also, sometimes there might be a recipe that calls for a little bit of the lemon pulp or something like that. It's not something which is unedible, it's something which definitely could be eaten in certain forms. Therefore, I would
scrape off the lemon peel to make the lemon zest and use that in baking.
Right. So again, if that's what's generally done with the peel, that's the only thing you really can do with the peel. So it's like, according to many opinions, that it's totally fine. I would even venture to say that it's fine. And that's also Nevorah that talks about making dyes out of things. So you can't make dyes, again, obviously if you can't make juice out of something where it's not usually juice, you definitely can't make dye out of it. But if it's something where that's really the only tafkid of it is to make dye for, definitely if it's dye for people, for makeup or something like that, so then it would definitely be marigolds. Marigolds are used, what's it called, keratin, lycopene. I can't remember the name of the dye that comes out of it. You have it in all the baby formulas. Also, that's used as a dye in a lot of the makeups. So something like that would be, so they would have a din of tzvichen actually. So you'd have to have a type of reason why it's not going to be considered tzvichen. But bona gidi, you get to that, or let's say you bought something that came from the nachri, you bought marigolds from the nachri, but you used your kedusha shvius money, so that has kedusha shvius on the marigolds. So then you probably would be able to get away with using it as a dye at that point in time. Definitely if it was being used as a food coloring.
Just to clarify about the tzvichen, maybe you said this when I didn't hear it, but am I correct that tzvichen is only usher if it's sprouted during Shmita, but if it's sprouted before Rosh Hashanah and you picked it after Rosh Hashanah, it's... Okay,
so things that grew in shishis and were harvested during Shvius, some of that is going to be considered tzvichen. The deciding factors vary. Certain types of things are if they grew most of the way before Shmita, it's going to be sufficient. Most things we're going to say like this. If the derech is that you you can't take care of it during Shmita. And if a derech is that you usually leave a point in time, I think we might have discussed this, I don't remember if I discussed this here, if I discussed it other places. We have one company that produces paprika, and there what happens is that the derech of harvesting the red peppers is to allow it to ripen on the vine, or the plant, whatever you want to call it, and it's referred to as a vine, is to leave it on the vine to dry out on there, because that's how it reaches its maximum sweetness and flavor, or whatever it is, if it's a little bit like shriveled up, which is true. Most people like their peppers to be crunchy and whatever, you know, to get that the crisp crunch when you bite into it. But the truth of the matter is, anybody who buys hot peppers does know that when you go to the store to buy a hot pepper, if you want it for the spice, try to buy the ones that are already a little bit shriveled up, not the ones that are nice and fresh, because the ones that are a little bit shriveled up are even spicier, they have more flavor. So what they do is they allow it to stay on the vine for about a month afterwards. So since that's always the derech, so if you finish taking care of it during the shishas, and now you're just allowing the sun ripen and you're picking it after Shvias, that's going to be viewed as shishas. Eggplants, that's something which is very common because eggplants stay on the vine for a long time. Also, things like that, that's going to be the case. Whereas if it's something or something where but if it's something that grows anew after you harvest it, tomatoes, things like that, it becomes much more complex. And if it's in your home garden, ask a rabbi. You're welcome to call me up, but you have a chashuv rav here. Any place that you can welcome to, you should ask a rav that is competent in Hilchos Shmita and about your home garden and all the different things, because everything varies, and how you grew it and where you grew it and everything like that can make a big difference.
Excuse me? So then everything's imported after Svichen?
So for Svichen, a lot of it's imported, a lot of it's Nachir, because even if I view Nachir as having Kedusha Shvias, there's no Isser for them to grow it, and there's no Isser for them to sell to me. Again, according to most opinions, but that's what's done. That's what's accepted, and that's what's done. Now, if I buy from a Nachir, and I view Nachir as having Kedusha Shvias, it's not having a Hafgah, and it's not removed from the sanctification of the Shemitah year, so then the Svichen do have Kedusha Shvias. So if you don't view Nachir as having Kedusha Shvias, then the vegetables also. But if you do, so both the fruit and the vegetables are going to have Kedusha Shvias. The other gisha, the other approach to get around it in Eretz Yisrael, not buying Nachir, not having imported things, is something called matzah minutak, which I'm not going to get into all the particulars of the halachos because they're numerous, and it's not nogeya to you unless you want to make a mini greenhouse at home. And if you do, call me up, send me an email. We're in business. I'll discuss it with you. I'm happy to help you out. But short of that, matzah minutak isn't so nogeya where you want to make an indoor vegetable garden or something like that. So then matzah minutak is nogeya, how to do that. Then you can grow something indoors that won't have any of the halachos of Shmita for it. So the idea is of matzah minutak, they grow in a greenhouse, so it's like a house-like setting. It's not grown on the ground, it's grown on a separate surface that's sealed off to the ground. And the greenhouse is closed all around, and so then it's not going to have Kedusha Shvias because it's not nechshav, it's not considered to have grown Eretz Yisrael. There are people that try to say that maybe it doesn't work for all sorts of different reasons, but the pashtus, again, like I said, to find somebody who's more machmer isn't too difficult. To find people who are more mekel is also not too difficult. But according to most, the matzah minutak works. Again, but it needs to have a good hashgacha on it because there's a lot of issues involved in doing it properly. That the containers that they grow in don't have holes, don't get cracked. That there's no big openings around the greenhouse. A lot of greenhouses have a lot of screen around it. So a screen isn't so simple. If that works, doesn't work. There's a lot of shilas involved in it. It needs a lot of pikuach, a lot of supervision to make sure that it stays through. There's a famous story where after they made one of the first big, this was two or three shemitas ago, they tried to make a big project of matzah minutak, and they made a whole thing where they invited all sorts of chavrei knesset and rabbanim and all sorts of different things to dedicate these greenhouses, because now they came out with a pitaron, with the way to work around not having to buy nachri, not having to buy imported stuff, things that grew in Israel, blue and white, as they say, and that didn't have any Shmita issues because it was Svichen, so there's no way around it. And they came, somebody had a big sign made up for the whole event, for the tekes, and he came, and the sign was on a picket, and he came and he stuck it in the middle of the whole thing, and there went the whole matzah minutak. So, like I said, it needs to be done properly, it needs to have proper supervision. I'm not sure that the whole matzah minutak went when he stuck the sign in. The problem is if he took the sign out, because if he put the sign in, it was still all sealed. When he took the sign out, that was definitely a problem. So everybody who yelled at him, right, like the famous story, the guy who comes down in the Nusach Svart Shul, sorry, a guy comes to daven for the Amr in Nusach Ashkenaz Shul, and he says, "V'atzmach b'kor kor b'shicha," and some guy screams out from the back, "No!" Right? So it's the same type of thing. They all scream, "No!" He took it out. Now that's what made the problems. But anyway, regardless, it needs proper supervision, so it needs a reliable, a very good kashrus overseeing matzah minutak. That's another approach to get around the Svichen issue.
This is a good point about flowers.
Okay. What? Flowers I didn't get into. Maybe we'll discuss next week. Not this week, on Wednesday. As Hashem. What we'll try to discuss on Wednesday is actually much more the home garden. And then maybe we'll get into flowers. When we discuss the home garden, so we'll discuss what's the problem with flowers. Flowers you don't eat, whatever it is. So we'll discuss things that are for smell, things that are for beauty, etc. If they grew in Israel, most of the pitzuchim don't grow in Israel. If they grew in Israel, sunflower seeds do grow in Israel, a lot of them. So yeah, that would have a problem with Svichen.
So it would have a problem with Svichen?
It would have an issue. It would have a problem. Svichen would be applicable to it, and you'd have to make sure that it doesn't have any Svichen issues.
Shkach.
Thank you.
Thank you.